Being a knight sounds exciting, right? Big castles, shiny armor, heroic battles. But the truth was nothing like the stories. Life back then was rough, and knights had it harder than most. This wasn't some fairy tale. Life as a medieval knight was brutal. The real question is, could you handle it? It all started early. Not early in the day, but early in life. At just 7 years old, your childhood ended. Not because you misbehaved, but because that's when knight training kicked in. While other kids were learning how to spell, you were packing up to serve a lord you'd never met. At age 7, these young boys became what was called a page. This wasn't just some light after-school activity. This was their entire life now. They moved into the castle of a lord or knight, often someone they'd never met before. Talk about the worst sleepover ever. It lasted for 7 whole years. The daily routine for these kids was brutal. They woke up before sunrise and immediately began serving the household. No hitting the snooze button when you're a page, unless you wanted to be the snooze button someone else hit. They learned proper manners and how to behave around nobles. One wrong move could get them a smack across the back of the head. They learned to ride horses when their legs were barely long enough to reach the stirrups. Many pages fell off so many times they were basically human bouncy balls. Their first lesson wasn't how to ride a horse, but how to fall off a horse without dying. These boys cleaned, carried messages, and served food to the knights and lords. The original food delivery service, except the tip, was not getting yelled at. They had to memorize all the rules of chivalry, learn about heraldry, and study the lineages of important families. All this while, modern 7-year-olds struggle to remember to brush their teeth without being reminded. When they turned 14, these boys graduated to become squires. But this wasn't a graduation that came with presents and cake. Instead, they got the honor of harder work and more painful training. Congratulations on your promotion. Your reward is twice the work and triple the bruises. As a squire, you were basically a knight's personal assistant. You cleaned his armor, which was covered in all sorts of unpleasant substances after battle. You helped him dress for battle, which could take up to 30 minutes with all those metal pieces. You cared for his horses, maintained his weapons, and carried his shield in battle. The physical training was where things got really tough. Every single day, these teenage boys practiced fighting with wooden swords, lances, and maces. Their teachers didn't go easy on them either. Today's lesson: I'll hit you with this stick until you learn how to stop me from hitting you with this stick. Studies of medieval skeletons show that many squires had healed fractures in their arms, ribs, and collarbones from training accidents. Medieval healthcare plan? Rub some dirt on it and get back to training. The first walk-it-off program in history. They trained in full armor too, which could weigh up to 60 pounds. Imagine doing push-ups while wearing your entire wardrobe at once. Many passed out from heat exhaustion, especially during summer training. There were no weekends off, no summer vacation, no sick days unless you were literally dying. Oh, you've only got one working arm today? Perfect time to practice your left-handed sword technique. No video games or movies to relax with after a hard day. Their entertainment was listening to stories about other knights who had suffered even more than they were suffering now. Medieval motivation technique. You think you're having a bad day? Let me tell you about Sir William, who fought with 3 arrows in his behind. This brutal training continued for 7 more years. By the time these young men reached 21, they had spent 2/3 of their lives preparing for knighthood. Their bodies were already covered in scars, and many had broken bones that never set quite right. And after all that pain and sacrifice, the real hardships of being a knight were just beginning. Because becoming a knight wasn't exactly a fancy celebration with cake and presents either. Though, if you made it this far without permanent brain damage from all those hits to the head, that was kind of a gift in itself. Not everyone got the deluxe knighting package. While some lucky nobles did receive elaborate ceremonies, most knights-to-be got what we might call the economy version of knighthood. Many were knighted right on the battlefield, covered in mud and blood, minutes before they might die. Talk about a rushed promotion. Congrats on the new job title. Now try not to get killed in the next hour. The battlefield knighting was quick and dirty. The commander would tap the squire's shoulders with a sword and mutter a few words. No music, no feasting, just a quick, "You're a knight now," and back to the chaos. Historical records from the 100 Years' War show that during the Battle of Crécy alone, over 200 squires were knighted this way, with more than half of them dying within the same day. Medieval career advancement came with some serious fine print. For those who did get the traditional ceremony, it wasn't exactly a fun party either. The night before becoming a knight, candidates had to undergo a ritual called the vigil. This meant staying awake all night in a cold church, praying nonstop while wearing white robes to symbolize purity. No snacks, no bathroom breaks, just hours of kneeling on stone floors until your knees felt like they were on fire. During this all-night prayer session, the soon-to-be knights had to confess all their sins to a priest. Every single one. From stealing apples as a child to impure thoughts about the miller's daughter. Nothing builds team spirit like sharing your deepest secrets with your fellow knights in training while your legs go numb from kneeling. By morning, these poor guys were exhausted, hungry, and probably questioning their life choices. Then came the actual ceremony where they had to kneel again on those already aching knees while various pieces of armor were handed to them one by one. Each piece came with a lecture about what it symbolized. The helmet represented dignity, the sword meant justice, the shield stood for protection of the weak. According to medieval manuscripts, some of these ceremonies could take up to 3 hours. Imagine standing there in half your armor, trying not to fall asleep, while someone drones on about what your left gauntlet symbolizes spiritually. And you thought graduation speeches were boring. The final act was the dubbing, a blow to the neck or shoulder with the flat of a sword. This wasn't a gentle tap either. Records from the 13th century mention that the blow should be hard enough that he shall remember it all his life. Nothing says welcome to knighthood like a good whack that leaves a bruise for weeks. After all this, there was usually a feast, but unlike modern graduation parties where you get to relax, the new knight had to serve food to everyone else first, wearing full armor the entire time. Historical accounts tell us that many new knights couldn't even enjoy their own celebration meals because they were too nervous about their first assignments. Because here's the real kicker. Immediately after becoming a knight, you were expected to prove yourself worthy of the title. Many were sent straight into dangerous missions or told to prepare for battle. One French chronicle records that during the siege of Rouen, 12 newly knighted men were sent to the front lines the same day as their ceremony, with their armor still shiny and unworn. So you survive 14 years of brutal training only to face an uncomfortable ceremony followed by an immediate life or death situation. Just when you thought the hard part was over, you discovered that earning the title of knight was merely the beginning of your troubles. Once you became a knight, your most constant companion was your armor. That shiny metal shell you see in museums looks cool, but wearing medieval armor was like being trapped inside a walking oven with the flexibility of a lamppost. A full suit of plate armor from the 1400s could weigh between 40 to 60 pounds. That's like carrying around a third grader on your back all day long. The weight was distributed across your body, but that didn't make it much easier to bear during long battles or tournaments. Knights didn't just slip into their armor like a jacket. Getting dressed required help and started with a padded garment called a gambeson to prevent chafing. Then came chainmail, thousands of interlocking metal rings. Finally, plate armor pieces were attached one by one. Records show that wealthy knights employed dedicated servants just to help them dress. Medieval armor was like the world's worst IKEA furniture, impossible to assemble by yourself and guaranteed to leave you frustrated and sweating. The entire process could take 20 to 30 minutes with experienced help. During urgent situations, knights sometimes had to skip pieces or wear only partial armor. Once sealed inside your metal cage, summer temperatures could reach over 100 degrees. Knights would lose gallons of sweat during battle. Many passed out from heat exhaustion before reaching the enemy. Medieval knights invented the sauna bath. They just wore it into battle. And bathroom breaks? Some armor had small openings, but in battle, you either held it, found a quiet moment to disassemble crucial pieces, or, well, there's a reason squires hated cleaning armor after battles. The helmet was its own torture device. Once you lowered the visor, your vision was reduced to a narrow slit. Breathing became labored, and your own hot breath bounced back into your face. Tests with replica helmets show that a knight's voice would be muffled by about 60%, making battlefield commands difficult to hear. The smell inside a well-used suit defied description. The padding absorbed sweat and couldn't be washed easily. Medieval texts describe the smell of knights after battle as most foul and like death itself. Knights didn't need to swing their swords to defeat enemies. Sometimes they just needed to remove their helmets. Many knights couldn't even mount their horses without help. Some suits of armor were so rigid that if a knight fell over, he would struggle to get up, like a turtle flipped on its back. But as uncomfortable as armor could be, it was still better than the alternative. At least inside that metal shell, you had some protection against the dangers of medieval life. And trust me, you'd need every bit of that protection, because a knight's life was about to get a whole lot more complicated once the action started. All those years of training and that uncomfortable armor led up to one main thing: battle. Knights are famous for fighting, but medieval combat wasn't anything like the neat, choreographed sword fights you see in movies. Medieval battlefields were incredibly loud. Hundreds of men shouting war cries, horses neighing in panic, weapons clanging against shields and armor, wounded fighters screaming in pain. All created a wall of sound that was overwhelming. It was like being at the world's worst concert where, instead of asking for your money back, you were just trying not to die. Knights couldn't hear commands from their leaders through all this noise, especially with those helmets on. Chronicles from the Battle of Towton in 1461 mention that commanders had to use trumpet signals because voice commands were useless in the chaos. Vision was another major problem. With those narrow eye slits in their helmets, knights could barely see what was right in front of them. It was like trying to drive a car while looking through a mail slot. You're guaranteed to hit something. You just don't know what. Then there was the ground itself. Medieval battles churned up the earth, turning fields into mud pits. Knights regularly slipped and fell during combat. And once you were down in that armor, getting back up quickly was nearly impossible. Nothing says mighty warrior like flailing around in the mud like a flipped turtle while someone tries to stab you. Contrary to popular belief, knights didn't usually die from dramatic sword cuts. Most battlefield deaths came from blunt force trauma, maces, war hammers, and poleaxes that could dent armor and crush the person inside it. Medical examinations of skeletal remains from medieval battlefields show that many knights died from head trauma, despite wearing helmets. The actual fighting was nothing like elegant duels. It was more like a violent shoving match where everyone was trying to knock their opponents down. Knights would grapple, wrestle, and use their shields as weapons. Battle could last for hours. Knights would become exhausted, dehydrated, and disoriented. Many died not from wounds, but from heat exhaustion. A Spanish battlefield account from 1385 described knights who fell without a wound, their strength baked out of them by the sun and their own armor. Even if you won the battle, you might not survive your wounds. Medieval medicine was primitive, and infection was a major killer. Medieval antibiotics consisted mainly of prayer and hoping for the best. One curious fact, most battles weren't actually that deadly for knights specifically. Common foot soldiers died at much higher rates than knights. This wasn't because knights were better fighters, it was because they were worth more. Capturing a knight alive meant you could demand a ransom for his return. Medieval combat had its own VIP section where the entry fee was paid in fancy armor and the exit fee was paid in cold, hard cash. After surviving the chaotic nightmare of medieval battle, knights might have hoped for some well-deserved rest. But the harsh reality of knighthood meant that danger and hardship weren't limited to the battlefield. When they weren't fighting in chaotic battles, knights had what you might call normal days. But don't picture them lounging around in castles being fed grapes by servants. A knight's daily routine was filled with responsibilities, rules, and more of that never-ending training. Dawn broke early for knights. Most were up before sunrise, beginning their day with prayer. The medieval version of a morning coffee was kneeling on a cold stone floor while your knees screamed in protest. After prayers came a light meal, usually bread and ale, sometimes with cheese or cold meat. Then came training. Yes, more training. Even experienced knights practiced their combat skills daily. Many knights devoted 2 to 3 hours each morning to physical training, regardless of the weather. Medieval training manuals suggest that knights should be able to mount a horse in full armor, ride at full gallop, and strike a target accurately with a lance. For knights who managed their own lands, which was most of them, the late morning and afternoon were filled with administrative duties. They had to settle disputes among peasants, collect taxes and rents, inspect their property, and meet with stewards. A knight's accounting ledger from 1407 shows that he spent more days dealing with property disputes than he did in actual combat. Being a medieval knight was like being a warrior, judge, tax collector, and property manager all rolled into one, except without the benefit of a smartphone calendar to keep it all straight. These land management duties weren't glamorous. Knights often had to decide who owned which chicken, where exactly a property boundary ran, or whether someone had the right to fish in a particular stream. One English manor's records from the 1300s show that nearly 40% of all cases brought to the knight involved stolen or damaged livestock. You train for 14 years to be an elite warrior, only to spend your Tuesday afternoon deciding who owns a questionable goat. Knights also had to enforce local laws and keep the peace. They were responsible for catching criminals and sometimes even carrying out punishments. This could involve organizing manhunts for outlaws, investigating crimes, and maintaining stocks or pillories for minor offenders. Food was another daily concern. Medieval meals for knights were substantial but not particularly fancy on normal days. An average knight consumed around 5,000 calories per day to maintain the strength needed for their physical demands. Records suggest knights ate about 2 pounds of meat daily, much more than the average peasant, but necessary for their lifestyle. Throughout all these activities, knights had to follow a strict code of behavior. The chivalric code wasn't just for special occasions, it governed everything from how a knight spoke to ladies to how he treated people of lower social status. Even leisure time came with obligations. Knights were expected to be accomplished in the knightly arts, which included music, poetry, dance, chess, and falconry. These weren't just hobbies, but social requirements. Medieval knights had to be deadly warriors by day and sophisticated entertainers by night, like a brutal combination of MMA fighter and theater kid. The physical toll of this lifestyle was immense. Even without battle wounds, the daily grind of training and labor left permanent marks on a knight's body that would follow them through the rest of their lives. After years of brutal training, tournaments, and battles, knights paid a heavy price with their bodies. Most were physically worn out by the time they hit 40, practically elderly by medieval standards. Knee problems were almost universal among knights past 30. Years of mounting horses, jousting, and fighting in heavy armor destroyed their knee cartilage. Studies of knight burial sites show knee joints with severe arthritis and signs of repeated trauma. Medieval knights invented the midlife crisis, only instead of buying a sports car, they just couldn't climb the stairs anymore. Back problems were another constant companion. The weight of armor and the impact of riding damaged the spine. Nearly 80% of examined knightly remains had compressed or herniated vertebrae. Many knights developed a permanent stoop as they aged. Shoulder injuries came from swinging swords and taking lance strikes. Hands developed early arthritis from gripping weapons. A knight with 40-year-old hands had the grip strength of a modern 90-year-old, making both fighting and writing love poems equally challenging tasks. Broken bones often didn't heal properly, leaving knights with crooked limbs. Head injuries accumulated from repeated concussions, which medieval medicine couldn't properly treat. Medieval knights basically invented CTE long before football players, just with more dragons in the mix. Wounds that never properly healed created chronic problems. Without antibiotics, even minor cuts could become infected. Dental problems were widespread due to their sugar-rich diet and lack of dental care. The medical care available was limited at best. Medieval medical advice basically boiled down to drink this mysterious herb tea and pray really hard, with predictably mixed results. Some knights retired early due to these physical limitations, sometimes as young as 35. Others joined monasteries where the more sedentary lifestyle gave their battered bodies a chance to recover. One French abbey had a special infirmary section for aged warriors seeking the peace of God and relief from their pains. Despite knowing the physical toll awaiting them, young men still eagerly pursued knighthood. The social prestige was powerful enough to overcome the certainty of a broken body by middle age. While real knights were limping around with bad knees and chronic pain, medieval storytellers were busy transforming the brutal reality of knighthood into something magical. The pain, stink, and endless drudgery got edited out, replaced by tales of perfect heroes performing impossible feats. Old songs made knights seem like superhuman figures. They could fight for days without tiring, defeat dozens of enemies, and always looked magnificent in their gleaming armor. The medieval equivalent of airbrushing, just paint over those battlefield infections and pretend that armor never chafed. The most popular tales portrayed warriors who embodied perfect virtues, always brave, loyal, and courteous. Real knights, however, were just regular humans trying to balance impossible expectations with their physical limitations. Literary texts reveal this growing gap between reality and fantasy. While poems celebrated knights fighting through grievous wounds without complaint, medical records from the same period show knights begging for pain relief and struggling to recover from minor injuries. Medieval audiences knew these stories weren't literally true, but they served an important social purpose. By idealizing knights, these tales created models for nobility to aspire to, while giving common people heroes to admire. Many knights went bankrupt trying to maintain their status, buying expensive armor and horses they couldn't afford. Records show that up to 40% of minor knights were in significant debt. Medieval knights, the original victims of keeping up with the Joneses, except the Joneses had a better horse and fancier helmet plume. What's most remarkable is how persistent these myths became. Even when gunpowder weapons began making knights obsolete on the battlefield, the romantic image of the knight remained powerful in European culture. The legends outlived the practical reality of knighthood by centuries. So there you have it, the brutal reality of knighthood. Real medieval knights weren't the shining heroes of legend. They were tough, suffering humans who paid a steep price for their status. Could you have handled it?